Week before an unusual storm, a guy named Brian has cereal with milk for breakfast. He also works at a cafe and often adds milk to customers' orders, including the girl he likes. However, she doesn't pay attention to him. On the day of the storm, Brian steps out of his house to retrieve the milk bottles placed by the doorstep. It is at that moment that a giant hailstorm begins. Lightning strikes Brian and throws him back into the hallway. The guy survives. Upon arriving at work, he proceeds to pour milk into customers' coffee as usual. The girl he likes takes her cup before the milk reaches it and leaves. The milk spills onto the tray. Brian notices that he can control milk with the power of his mind and make it gather into a small puddle. Discovering this ability, he sets up a camera in his kitchen and records himself using telekinesis to pour milk from the bottle into the bowl of cereal. Then he demonstrates his abilities at work, causing portion cream packages to explode. This elicits excitement from those around him. The girl who previously ignored Brian now looks at him with interest. Information about Brian's abilities appears in the newspaper. He is called the Incredible Milk Manipulator. On the same day, a woman named Laura comes to him and becomes his agent, organizing a press conference. Brian addresses the journalists and announces that he named his ability lactokinesis and himself as the world's first superhero. Kelly, Curtis, Alicia, Simon, and Nathan, 5 delinquents and public workers who also gained superpowers during the storm, observe the press conference. Kelly refers to Brian's ability as the most disgusting in the world. Later, Curtis expresses disbelief at Brian's decision to reveal himself to the world and doubts that others will follow his example. Simon voices his disapproval, considering it a bad idea. Nathan objects, pointing out that they only have 2 days left of their mandatory work, and he can use his abilities to earn more money. He believes that as an immortal, he should do something more significant than just flipping burgers and can come up with a superhero alias for himself. Their supervisor named Sean overhears all this information and informs the press. When Simon tries to exit the community center to collect trash, he finds a crowd of journalists with cameras outside the door who start taking pictures of him. Simon retreats and states that now everyone knows about their abilities, although the others don't immediately believe him. Nathan agrees to check the information and confirms that Simon is telling the truth. Kelly angrily asks how the reporters found out about them. Nathan says he doesn't know but notices Sean and accuses him. Sean doesn't even deny it and declares that he doesn't care what happens to his charges, then leaves for the Caribbean islands. Nathan is surprised that they weren't recognized earlier, since none of the 5 showed any caution. Alicia worries about what will happen next. Simon suggests that they might be confined to a secret military base and subjected to experiments. To avoid this, they need to go into hiding, change their names, sever ties with their families and loved ones, disguise themselves, and only go out at night. The rest of them dislike this prospect. At that moment, Laura, Brian's agent, enters the room. She proposes getting rid of the need to hide and using their abilities to earn big money. The friends discuss what to do with this offer. Simon insists that they didn't receive their abilities to make money, but Curtis objects. They don't know what to do next since no one wants to go back to the labor exchange. Kelly reminds them that they essentially killed several people and asks what to do about it. However, Laura easily solves the problem, stating that the deceased individuals were villains and the 5 delinquents are not killers but heroes. If that strategy doesn't work, they can simply dispose of the bodies and compensate the relatives of the deceased. 4 friends accept the offer while only Simon refuses. He believes it's a huge mistake. The others go out to the press and indeed become famous. Sometime later, Nathan wakes up in a luxurious hotel room in the company of 3 girls. Simon, possessing the ability to become invisible, walks through the hotel corridors and accidentally witnesses Laura catching up with Brian, asking if there is any news from the French about the cheese deal. Laura replies that the French call him Mr. Cheesehead and suggests they talk later, getting distracted by a call about a new girl with superpowers. Simon notices that Brian is clearly tense and reacts disapprovingly to what is happening. Then, Simon enters Newton's room and becomes visible. He asks Newton for permission to live with him because his parents, upon learning about his ability, freaked out, and he has nowhere else to go. Newton readily agrees. Crowds of fans gather outside the hotel waiting to meet the heroes. Newton arrives at the appointed meeting with his friends and Laura. Laura suggests that if any of the 4 have past moments they wouldn't want to see in the newspapers, they should share them now and she will handle everything. Newton and Kelly share a few details about their intimate life. At the banquet organized for sponsors and superheroes, Brian tries to talk to Laura, but she passes by ignoring him. He then approaches the group to introduce himself, but they are skeptical of him. Newton mocks Brian and he leaves. Laura suggests that Newton shoot himself live on air, and Newton agrees, calling it a great idea. At that moment, Daisy, a girl with the ability to heal, appears. Laura says that she is their modern Mother Teresa with superpowers and plans to heal the whole world. She also mentions the possibility of making a lot of money. In front of everyone present, Daisy heals a boy in a wheelchair, restoring his ability to walk. Meanwhile, Brian returns to his room and finds his girlfriend packing her things. She claims that she was with him only because of his abilities, but now there are guys who can do much cooler things, and Brian is just playing with milk. Brian decides to show her what he's capable of and forces the yogurt she ate to rise up the esophagus and strangle her. Then he reads an article about Daisy and realizes that he must eliminate her as a competitor. At the same time, Newton discovers that he has contracted a sexually transmitted disease from one of the girls. Simon suggests seeking help from Daisy since she knows how to heal. Newton agrees, considering it a great idea, and goes to Daisy's room to heal her. Meanwhile, Daisy watches a report in which the 5 offenders talk about their abilities. Brian, watching her through a slightly open door, notices a bottle of milk on the table. Nathan comes to Daisy and asks for her help, but Daisy apologizes and says she doesn't treat sexually transmitted diseases since she needs physical contact with the affected area for healing. She suggests that Newton see a doctor and undergo a course of antibiotics, but it doesn't suit him as it would take too long. Daisy refuses nonetheless. Newton pretends to accept her refusal and shifts her attention to a small sculpture depicting joined hands. Daisy explains that she received the sculpture for her charity work in India. Newton tries to take advantage of the moment and touch Daisy's infected area with his palm. At that moment, Brian makes Daisy choke on the consumed milk. Startled, Newton pushes her away. Daisy falls onto the sculpture and dies. Laura enters the room and Newton tries to explain to her how it all happened and that it was an accident. Laura resolves all matters with the police and Nathan feels relieved. Friends say that something like this could only happen to him. Nathan declares that if someone like Curtis is so concerned about Daisy's fate, they should use their abilities to go back in time and save the girl. Curtis reminds him that he cannot control time travel. Laura warns Nathan that she will destroy him if he fails again. Somewhat surprised by such a threat, he agrees. Back in his room, Nathan tells Simon that Daisy managed to heal him before she died. At that moment, someone knocks on the door. Simon becomes invisible and Alicia enters the room. She complains to Nathan that her relationship with Slav does not bring her any satisfaction and everything seems meaningless. Alicia says that Simon knew in advance that it would turn out this way and they should have listened to him. Simon, still in the room, overhears this. The girl asks Nathan if he knows where Simon is. He lies, saying he has no idea. Meanwhile, Laura informs Brian that she can no longer represent his interests because she has new clients. Angry, Brian forces Laura to eat cheese, which then blocks her arteries. The woman dies. In the community center, preparations were underway for the show, in which Nathan played the main role. A transparent bulletproof aquarium was installed and the revolver was loaded. Nathan and his friends were eating pizza and drinking beer, paying little attention to the fact that he was about to shoot himself. He hoped that such an act would only increase his popularity with women. Curtis refused the pizza due to lactose intolerance, since he did not consume dairy products including cheese. Kelly and Alicia went to the restroom before the show began. While Alicia was in the stall, Kelly complained loudly that something was dripping on her from the ventilation, but then suddenly fell silent. Surprised by the sudden silence, Alicia realized that something was wrong. She opened the stall door and saw Brian. Nathan enthusiastically examines the revolvers and accidentally fires a shot, shattering a cup. There are only 20 seconds left before the broadcast begins. Simon receives a message from Alicia telling him that if he wants to see her and Kelly again, he must come to the hotel. He tells the others about it until Nathan, who took his place in the aquarium, unexpectedly shoots himself live on air and dies. Curtis, Simon, and Mickey, Curtis's girlfriend, burst into the bathroom from which Kelly and Alicia disappeared. They discover a puddle of milk on the floor and realize that Brian has kidnapped the girls. Nikki, unable to control her teleportation ability, moves faster than Curtis can stop her. The girl lands on the bed in a room where Brian restrains Alicia using plastic wrap. Nathan resurrects a few minutes after the gunshot and says he wouldn't recommend repeating it at home. He is changing clothes when Kelly enters the dressing room. The guy demands that she leaves because his new fans could burst in at any moment. Kelly says that the others are trapped and Brian has captured Alicia. Nathan is surprised and asks when it could have happened. Kelly explains that Brian killed her and she is dead. Curtis and Simon arrive at the hotel in search of Alicia. Curtis notices Brian and rushes to chase him while Simon loses sight of his friend. Nathan arrives there and confronts Brian near the elevator. Brian affects the lactose in Nathan's body, but when Nathan says he cannot be killed because of immortality, Brian objects that he doesn't plan to kill him, but intends to wrap his brain with food film, making Nathan a vegetable for the rest of his days. Leading Nathan on the floor, Brian continues on his way. Simon calls Alicia trying to locate her, and following the sound of the phone, he enters a room where he discovers Mickey and Alicia dead, both girls suffocated. In one of the corridors, Curtis steps on a wet spot on the floor. He enters the room from where the water is flowing and sees an overflowing bathtub and Laura dead. Meanwhile, Simon, who still loves Alicia, mourns her and kisses her on the forehead. He decides that he must seek revenge. The guy leaves the room, becomes invisible, and sets out to find Brian. However, Curtis finds him first and confronts the killer in the corridor, asking him why he did all this. Brian smirks and explains that people like him only get attention when they kill a lot of people. Now people will talk about him for years. Curtis declares that Brian is powerless against him because Curtis also has lactose intolerance, which means there is nothing in his body that the killer could control. Brian is unfazed by this and threatens to kill Curtis, pulling out a cheese knife and attempting to strike. However, his knife gets stuck in the space, and at that moment Simon appears between them, becoming visible again and falling against the wall. Startled, Brian runs away, leaving Curtis with Simon. Dying, Simon tells his friend that everyone else is dead and only Curtis, with his ability to time travel, can save them all. They need to go back to a time when they weren't famous yet and stop Brian. Although Curtis can't control his time travels, the news of his friends' deaths throws him back into the past. He finds himself again in the dressing room at the community center, where all 5 of them are still alive and getting ready for community service. Curtis looks so shocked that Alicia asks him what happened. The guy says they need to do one thing. Meanwhile, Brian is preparing to record his video that will make him famous. He sets up the camera on a tripod and sits at the table, but suddenly hears a knock on the door. He has to get up to open it. On the doorstep, he sees the 5 friends. Curtis, without saying a word to Brian, punches him in the face. In the end, the guy never releases his video demonstrating his abilities, and the world remains unaware of the new superheroes. Several days later, the period of community service comes to an end. Nathan hangs his orange uniform in the locker. Kelly says she thought they would somehow celebrate the completion of the work. Alicia replies that there's not much to celebrate. Simon confesses that the time he spent with friends was the best in his life. Alicia and Kelly smile, but Nathan jokes that last year he spent a week in Spain, and it was much cooler. He doesn't share the overall optimism, because he doesn't have a job, a girlfriend, money, or useful skills. Moreover, he has nowhere to live. Yes, he's immortal, but that's the only plus. Everyone contemplates what awaits them tomorrow and the day after. They will simply join the ranks of the unemployed. A few seconds of silence fill the room. Then Kelly suggests go into a bar. Nathan readily agrees and says that if they forget about the murder and other horrors, these community service days weren't that bad. The friends don't respond. One by one, all 5 of them leave the dressing room.